Awesome, thank you. Well, thanks everyone for coming up and sitting in the tent, and hopefully the next 45, 50 minutes will be enlightening time for you. My name's Jason Smith. I'm Jason, yep. I'm a local boy, I only live 10 minutes away up on the hill. I'm a painter and decorator by trade, but my journey started with fire about 13 years ago. Previous to that, I'd had a workplace accident. Didn't know I was living with a rare kidney disease and passed out and fell through a skylight and was induced into a coma for 27 days. In that coma, I seen a woman. As a kid growing up, my dad used to say to me, Jason, you're an Aboriginal boy, you come from Fanny Smith, but don't go telling anyone about it. Never seen photos of that old woman, and in that coma, I seen that old woman. After I got healthy and come out of that coma, I needed to find out who I was and where my culture was. So I reached out to my local Aboriginal community and in turn started to get the opportunity to work back on country as a ranger. In 2012, the most incredible human named Victor Stephenson come down to Tasmania. Victor's probably one of the leading fire practitioners around Australia, and he said to us he was going to teach us how to put fire onto country. I thought he was completely mad. I didn't even understand what that meant. After spending 5 days with that man, it went straight through me. And there my obligation and responsibility of caring for country with fire started. In 2015 we were lucky enough to attend one of Victor's workshops up in the Cape York Peninsula up the Mary Valley, and I met an old man, Dr. Tommy George, who was a man that Victor had learned his knowledge from. That 5-day workshop and what we've seen and experienced up there, it was like the most powerfulest drug had gone through me. So I come back to Tassie, and as scary as it sounds, I walked around Risdon Cove lighting fires and teaching myself what fire was about. So it pretty much saved my life. At that time I was an alcoholic, I was a drug user, I was in an abusive relationship, and to be honest, my dad had passed away a few years earlier and my life was out of control. The fire saved me, fire and country. So pretty much from 2015 through to 2019, every day I'd wake up and ask myself, what can I do to look after country with fire? And that's probably the hardest thing about this journey for everyone is we're talking about something pretty serious. We're talking about walking out onto the bush and lighting fires. So that's got to be done responsibly. So for the last 5 years, I've been back down in the Huon Valley just teaching landholders how to put fire back onto their country. Because everywhere we look, for thousands of years, this land needed fire. I'm a little bit, I'll be honest with you, and if there's any Aboriginal people here, I don't mean to offend you. I'm proud of my Aboriginal heritage, but I'm also proud of my English and Irish heritage on my mum's side. This isn't about us versus them. This isn't about Aboriginal or non-Aboriginal. This is about human beings coming together, getting back out on country and looking after country and healing country with fire and healing ourselves. Okay, if we don't start to do that together, the fires that we talk about down here of the 1967 bushfires, they're going to look pretty small compared to what's coming. Unfortunately, we can't fix 200 years of neglect in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But by geez, we owe it to our kids to start strengthening us as humans and our relationships back onto country to start doing that. So that's pretty much my journey, and I'm very lucky to be able to run workshops down here. A little bit over the way that, like everything in life, money comes in and tries to dictate how this is going to look. So my workshops are purely run on a barter system. Entry fee to my workshops is a 6-pack of eggs or a tin of honey or some fresh fruit and produce. Because when things go ugly in the next 20 years, we've got to get back to that barter system. Okay, and that's the way that we survived on country as human beings for thousands of years. We had law, L-O-R-E, and we had a barter system. It doesn't matter where your heritage comes from. Fire is a healing agent, and it's a healing agent for all of us. So I feel very privileged to be alongside Jack today and to be from Matthew Evans to be given this opportunity to come and talk about this. is, quite powerful, but we've got to stop talking and we've got to start acting. Okay, so we've got to encourage people to get along to workshops, come to these events, have conversations, and every morning you wake up, ask yourself, what can I do today to help country? Because unfortunately we're going to see some fires, whether it's this year, next year, or the next 5 years, we're going to see some pretty scary bushfires. So, yeah, there's a very fine line between a good fire and a bad fire. And unfortunately, Western knowledge has really taught us about fire in the wrong way. We're scared of fire. Okay? Once you start to understand fire and form a connection with fire, it is the most beautifulest, powerful land management tool we could ever imagine. Okay? When I run these workshops and I see 40 or 50 people of all ages, kids, 2-3-year-old kids walking through the landscape, watching little fires trickle through that landscape, wow, that's beautiful. But in part of that, we've got to get back out on country. We're not using the stringy barks anymore. We're not eating the lamandras. We're not rejuvenating that kangaroo and wallaby grass for the animals. Our animals are sick, and in turn, so are we. So this is not just about going and lighting a few fires just to reduce a bit of fuel to prepare us to be safe for the bushfire season. This is about a connection back on country. So I could ramble on for days and days and days. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to pass it over to Jack and let Jack introduce himself.
Thanks, brother. I'm a Ewan fella, so with connections to Tasmania, but our country's south coast, New South Wales, hemmed in by the Great Dividing Range, and our people were moved up and down the coast, but also inland onto shared country up in the high country each year. But I've lived all of my life on Gadibanud Gunditj Mara country, so it's the King Parrot speakers of the Gunditj Mara Nation. So that's really the Great Ocean Road sort of area south of the Kulin Nation. I am a wildlife biologist by trade, and studied at various universities. Who cares? But I ended up randomly getting a job back where I grew up on Cape Otway, working for a conservation NGO, and we had an issue with overabundance of koalas. So when I was a kid, I always get the years mixed up, but I think in 1985, 71 koalas were released into the Managum woodlands of Cape Otway. By the time I returned some 20 odd years later, or maybe less, they were in some areas between 20 and 40 koalas to the hectare. I've images of 27 koalas in a tree. That created a rolling mall effectively of tree dieback, complete death of the forests that I grew up in. Government departments got involved with how that should be managed, and of course that was a cluster. But that's what governments do, don't they? They take simple things and make them ridiculously impossible. What we needed to look at is how we can restore this country. We can either give it away and it will turn on its head. It will go from being the beautiful open woodlands that I grew up in, or it will become basically shrub-dominated coastal scrub that will come in from the coast. And I wasn't prepared to give up on it. And I shouldn't say me, but several of us weren't prepared to give up on it. There weren't a lot of us. And so we started to think about what we could do, and we wanted to reintroduce fire. Now, to that point, really my fire knowledge had come from a sort of Western fire ecology sense. And no one in southwestern Victoria was lighting fires on private property in the bush. Plenty of stuff on public land, but there was really no mechanism. So I joined the CFA, the Country Fire Authority, and we ended up developing a program of fuel hazard reduction burning. Effectively was what they thought they were doing. I was there to try and re-stimulate tree growth, so activate the seed that was in the seed bank to try and get a next generation of trees coming through. it was an abysmal failure. They didn't come through. So we learnt later that ants were eating all the seed and scurrying them off, and you basically had to burn within 6 months of any seed set from a significant seeding event from the manna gums, which I think you call swamp gum in Tassie, yeah. So we ended up planting hundreds of thousands of trees to restore that, which was grim. But what I did think as we were doing is, geez, this fire practice is shitful. You know, it's really scorching the ground. It's killing some of the remaining trees. We have to be doing better than that. And I guess I was really lucky in some ways to have a similar journey to a degree to your brother. I got to spend a little bit of time with Victor, but, other elders, Gunditjmara, and also UN elders on the south coast. So, and through that, I built my fire knowledge in a more traditional sense, and I think people kind of expect us to have like this recipe book around it, but it's fire knowledge, but it's actually related knowledge, right? So the vast majority around is where is water sitting in the landscape, and can you read the plants, and that's about where the water sits and what we can do with the soil, and it's also about reading the atmosphere and what it's doing, and wind spirit, Kurakarai, basically takes stuff out of our hands sometimes, and we've got to be careful. And over a long period of time, we started to do better and better practice, to the point where I have the privilege of taking people walking through country, and they'll say, when are you going to take us to the bit you burnt? And I said, you've been walking through it for 10 minutes. I guess that's what we're aiming for. So it's that gentle kind of fire that opens country up, allows it to breathe, but it's opening up the spaces between what you'd think of as rank grass, and allowing the next generation of plants to come up through. So it's a gentle thing. I have it in for koalas, but they should be able to sit in a tree whilst you burn underneath them and not pay any attention, which is sort of what they like to do, is pay no attention to anything ever, except their next meal. So I'm a fire ecologist now by trade, and I'm not a very good one because I can't do maths, but that's what I do. Where should we go from here?
Any questions from the audience to kick off?
I've got a question. Actually, I'd like to draw Terry into it if I can, with your grazing experience and on the grasslands and the Marina or Western Queensland. How do you see the role of fire and grazing animals working together?
Yeah, what is the role of I guess, the relationship between grazing animals and fire in reducing biomass? Is that sort of where you're at? Yeah, Terry, did you want to have the first crack at it? Right, we'll have the last word.
You can have the last word. So my view is that Australia evolved as a fire climax, and ecologically you can have two climaxes, either a fire climax or a grazing climax. And if you go to the Great Plains of America and Africa and those places, those plains and grasslands are actually grazing climaxes. But fire still plays a role in those. And I think we've made a mistake through a lot of our grazing land by taking fire out. And I've been partly responsible for that. We've taken it out for too long. But I've been saying to people, and my clients now for probably 20 odd years, is that we need to look at how we put fire back in. And even before I met Stefan, I realised that they needed to be cool fires, but I really didn't know the technology of a cool fire. So, and the Indigenous knowledge behind cool fires. So I think that the two probably have to go hand in hand a little bit. And one of the things I guess that I'm still learning about grazing is that we need to shock country sometimes. We need to change it up or change it around or change it different. And I think fire is one of those tools that can do it.
Just go in order. Yeah, look, I appreciate the tension between grazing and fire, and I guess the sort of savoury line of thinking around holistic plan grazing. And look, my elders have always said that this was not a country that evolved to halved hooved animals, and because of that, we want to look after our soft-footed animals, and we do that in a number of ways. One of them is by burning to allow green pick to come up. that those animals can be healthy on. And we're talking largely perennial, well, almost solely perennial native grasses that a lot of our burning takes place in. Not always now. Like we do, I don't know, I burn in a fair bit of non-native pasture now because it's crept into the scrub. But that's what I've been taught by my elders, and I appreciate that our food systems are not based on that idea, but that's probably my answer.
Yeah, and very, very similar views on that. I don't have the knowledge as far as burning pasture like we see out to the right of us, and in the very rare circumstances that I've seen a negative effect as far as phalaris grass. When we burnt certain sections of that, we found that the potency of the reshoots that come back were actually really detrimental to the health of the native animals. So our wallabies and kangaroos were getting really sick because they weren't used to the potency of that phalaris grass after fire. And plus, let's face it, we're running out of wallaby grass and kangaroo grass. And there's no secret that that grass is named because that's the animals that love that. So my focus, as much as, I love what this event's about today, and I wish I could offer, that quick fix to everyone when it comes to this type of burning out here, but I don't have the answers for that, and my focus is purely for the native bushland, because I'm seeing not only the ill health of the native grasses and systems out there, but the animals. And for me, I think we've all got a bit of pyro in us. I think we all like sitting around the fire. We're a bit mesmerised, and when you start to go on this cultural burning, cool burning, whatever label you want to put on it, this journey, it's quite exciting. Some of those fires, it gets the heart rate going. But now it's become a lot more than the actual fire for me. It's become a real spiritual connection, an understanding. So as on an example, anywhere we look out here on the bushland around here, you just can't go and light it up. We're talking ridiculous fuel loads. So the workshops that I run, for the first hour or so of those workshops that we do, we're actually walking in and we're picking up sticks. Okay, we're picking up some of that dead wood that, experts might say, oh, that's habitat. It's not habit. Wasn't habitat 200 years ago. So we're taking a lot of the fuel out, because if we don't take some of that fuel out before we burn, it's not a cool burn. I can tell you that right now. As soon as you light that up, it is intense. When you start to create the more heat in that fire, you're damaging that soil and you're nuking that seed bank that's been sitting under there waiting for that right fire. Okay, so a lot of my burning techniques are around manual labour. Is going in, if I want to burn an area the size, and this will be, the size of this tent would be the average size of a burn I will do. No bigger. Okay, but what I might do is I might walk over 2 or 3 kilometres and do 10 or 15 of these. But before I do that, I want to stick my fingers in the soil and I want to feel moisture. I want to feel coldness. I want to feel that soil is going to be able to withstand that fire. And 99.9% of those fires need to be self-extinguishing fires. Okay, so they need to go out by themselves. There's so many different elements on a spiritual connection, but, reconnecting the animals, for 200 years, we've taken humans that had the most strongest connection to country off the country. We've stopped fire. Farmers, my dad used to tell me about farmers were burning back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. But something happened in the 70s and 80s where we just stopped fire. Okay, and our relationship with fire changed. I don't know if anyone, went to the biochar workshop earlier on, the importance of the biochar that we leave after the fire is so important. To watch those native animals come in after a cool burn, cultural burn, and sit there and start picking up that ash and feeding on it. The look and the expression on those animals' faces, it's the most beautiful thing you'd ever want to find. So even though I'm kind of steering away from the original thing, there is a place for fire in this type of, regen type farming landscapes, but I'm not the right man to be asking or certainly to be doing it. Yep.
Can I yeah, bro. I got the microphone, sorry. I just want to pick up on something that Terry said and you alluded to, was around shocking systems. So there's a number of ways to skin cats, right? And we can do fire in a lot of different ways. And the old people had a system that they had a very long shot at manipulating with fire, and so they could use it in a very specific way, which we try to when we can. But a lot of systems, ecological systems I'm talking about, not, agricultural ones, I know that's how you think. A lot of ecological systems have changed considerably in the last 200 years. Not only have we logged the shit out of them, we've also then selected a lot of our forests in particular to grow a stack of stems of trees, right? Because we wanted to log the shit out of them again. And now what we have are very, very dense and overcrowded forests that are burnt hot a lot. And so when you burn hot, you tend to have moderate intervals between fire, but when they do burn, they burn at extreme temperatures. And that actually encourages more eucalypts to germinate, wattles and peas. And so you get a really dense top story and a really, really dense mid story. But the thing that Brother and I want to be burning is the stuff on the ground, the grasses, is what we want to carry traditional fire. And they basically drop out of the system. So where we would go and do our normal thing, in fact, what we've got is an extraordinarily volatile fire system waiting to happen. And instead of us being able to walk out there in the middle of winter and burn, in fact, because there's nothing of the fine fuel on the ground, we can't do that. It will only burn in serious wildfire conditions, and that's what we saw on the eastern seaboard 3 years ago. And it will be worse next, because instead of coming back into that country very quickly and starting to shock a system or manipulate it, we've let it go. And driving through far east Gippsland and my country on the New and South Coast now, that bush, which was overstocked with trees and dense with shrubs, is now an extraordinary wall of scrub. We do need to think as a society about whether or not that is the cycle we would like to keep churning through, because it will happen to us. Fire will just happen to us if we don't maybe shock ourselves into thinking of it differently. I'll have a first crack. So I live in the Otway range, which is sort of just across the Bass Strait, I guess. Feels like an extension of the Tasmanian rainforest, really. But rainforest breathes constantly, right? So in between major fire events, rainforest creeps out of the gullies, right? And that's the system I live in. It's the same far east Gippsland in your warm temperate rainforests. Very few of these really wet forest systems and rainforests were burnt a lot. It's not true to say they weren't burnt, because we know in specific circumstances they were. But my feeling, and I'd be interested in Brother's thoughts, is that the majority of what we can do to protect our rainforests as they recover is to actually work on the country around them to act as a buffer. Because there's country that's there's practice and taboos associated with fire that you would avoid, and that's like scorching trees, and that happens really easily in rainforest. So it's really about what we can do to manage the type of fire behaviour in the surrounding country, so that when you do have a running bushfire in summer that you're out of control of, the behaviour drops itself to a point where it's either self-extinguishing in the wetter country, or you have some chance of controlling it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the one thing that, and there's no blame in this, we just don't understand, and especially here in Tassie, the way things had happened here at the time of whatever word you want to use, invasion, colonisation, whatever, there was a law system and there was a tribal responsibility in all of these areas. So, for instance, the Malakati people, the Lyell Quanti people of the far south and Dover area, they had an obligation to protect those rainforest areas. So that country was leading up into a certain boundary, which was easily identifiable by the eye and by law systems, was in the country to say, okay, we needed to protect by fire up until this point. When I go up the Cape, around the Mary Valley, Woodgill, Cape, Cooktown, all of those places, those mobs will say to you, that fire will travel 1.2 kilometres over there and it'll hit that edge and it'll go out. because they still have that connection and that unbroken law system to country. The truth of the matter is we've lost it. Okay, we don't have the evidence to get it back. So this is where it's really important as humans, not as non-Aboriginal crap that we keep referring to. As humans, we get back out on country together. You know, this community, the Huon Valley, it's one of the strongest communities that I've ever come across in so many ways. It's going to be even stronger when we come together as caretakers of country with fire. You know, my goal and my aim is for 5-6 months of every year that someone rings up and says, all right, my property's, you know, ready, and 40 or 50 of us rock up on a Sunday afternoon, we put the fire on, we have a feed, and for 2 or 3 hours of that day, we go out and we help each other look after that property. You know, that's what we need to be striving for. And as we're doing that, we're reintroducing our own law system. Okay, we can't go back to living 200 years ago. We don't have that. Okay, that's gone. Those law systems that existed back then are gone. But for the sake of our kids, we've got to start to recreate another one. Okay, and that's an obligation for all of us as humans to do. The worst thing about it is we're not going to do it in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is a commitment. You know, we've got to put days away every week where that's our number one focus. Because if we don't, we know what's going to happen. Okay? Yeah. Yeah. Wow, that's a good question. I think personally one of the... Repeat, how do I repeat that? I think one of the reasons why the focus isn't on the native aspect of the food system at the moment is, for me personally, I think not only do we not have the knowledge, we think we don't have the knowledge, I think non-Aboriginal people have had this unnecessary pressure put on them that they don't feel that they've got a right or a responsibility to go out and bush and be a part of that. And one thing I say in the workshops that I run, that if I locked you all into the workshop up on my property now for the next 60 days, I tell you what, you're going to look at those lamandras and some of those grasses and that native cherry tree and all of those things a lot differently. Okay, and I know for a fact that if I took all of us right now to the top of the hill, as unhealthy as it is, I guarantee you we could survive up there for 30 or 60 days on the food that's up there. Yeah, we might have to sharpen up a few spears and, spear the old wallaby or whatever. That might upset people, but we've lost that connection and that obligation to the food that's still out there. As sick as this place is, there's enough food in that out there that we could survive. I know if me and Jack went bush for the next 2 weeks, we wouldn't be needing to go to Coles or Woolies. We wouldn't miss our phone. And I think the distractions of the environment that we're living in now has taken us away. It was only back in the 50s and 60s, all farmers and all people that lived in rural areas had a massive connection and obligation to country. Whether it was because they had sheep or cattle, or whether it was just because they loved the birds that were out there, or they loved the feeling of being out on country. Now we've been forced into this shitfest of a city-type system and this government dictation and this labelling and this use of obsessive language and wording that it's all separated us from the bush again. And I'll tell you, when that bush talks to me, it doesn't say, I just want people with Aboriginal heritage to come back out. All right, it wants every single one of us. It wants us all back out there. All right?
I was in a a parliamentary inquiry in Victoria into ecosystem decline about 4 years ago, and I did my thing. And I was pretty grumpy, actually. The Victorian government had ignored report on report about ecosystem collapse and were promising yet again to do fuck all about it. And I was literally asked to present on, and I'll get to your question, I will, but it'll take a while. And I was literally asked to present from the perspective of what it meant to an Indigenous person when ecosystems decline. I don't know, I don't know. So I went in there and I told a similar yarn about the koalas, but I let myself get emotional because it does affect me. It really genuinely shaped the way I see the world and relate to other people, because I thought, geez, you people that pretended to actually care about the welfare of koalas let thousands of them starve to death, and I euthanized most of them that came to us in a shithouse condition. I thought, I want you to hear that in my voice. So what the relevance to your question is, when white people first came to Gulajan country, the blackfellas there, or Kirrarung country, the blackfellas there, their immediate thought was, how are we going to initiate this mob? They are fucking clueless, right? It wasn't we're going to chuck spears at them or any of that stuff. That came later, after rape and massacre. It was, how are we going to explain to them that don't speak our language how you look after this bit of country? And so brother's point is exactly right. Mother does not care who you are. She just expects you to recognise your responsibility to her. And that's all we expect, right? Because that's really the key. So agricultural system, scrub, there's always a differentiation because of the food systems we have had forced upon us. But really it should all come back to the same care and the same responsibility. Yes, and, you know, why aren't blackfellas doing more of this stuff on country? Maybe it's sort of a twist of your words. That's to do with land ownership. We had a beautiful presentation about land ownership. Land was taken off blackfellas. Like, all of it was taken away, right? And so through a whole range of systems, some of that country is being taken back. But there's normally a whole lot of shit that we can't do on that country, whether it's through joint management of public land, whether it's through the creation of IPAs, where people don't want to farm, by the way, never where people want to farm. There's a whole lot of things that can't be done. And so the challenge is, and, you know, Mum and Dad did set that farm up because they had an opportunity. They made a stack of money out of a book and they chucked it into that farm, right? That was a really rare opportunity. But they're a mob doing this stuff, just on a small scale, tends to be, but they require support, and they're a mob who'd bend over backwards to do it if they had the opportunity and access to country. Oh, bugger. So the question was, do we think fire is a way to bring more of an Indigenous worldview into agricultural systems? Is that fair? Yep. How do we close the gap? Well, there's no. Apologies. Look, I think it's one way. I mean, some interesting stuff globally, right? So biodiversity is declining at an extraordinary rate. It is declining more quickly in protected areas than anywhere else in the world, right? That's a bit of a head flip for some people. So are we managing that protected country particularly well? Probably not. Fair argument. But also, where are the great opportunities for biodiversity? I mean, if you look at the amount of country that is under, arable country that is under agricultural systems, you'd have to say that the best opportunities to advance biodiversity are probably in agricultural systems. So if we are going to have a livable world for my children's children, which I really hope you guys are in bed with the idea of that being a good thing, we probably don't have a choice. We have to do it because so much arable country around the world is under agricultural systems. So let's work together to make them. And, look, some of this isn't rocket science. Biodiverse systems support more biodiversity. We know some of the things you need to do, like linear connection, and it's not rocket science. Rocket science is rocket science.
I don't know how many times I've used that rocket science phrase, heaps. I definitely think that fire is the answer. But the priority for once in this nation's history has got to be the native bushland first. If we get that right and we get that health system back right in there, the animals don't need to come into this type of area, okay, for a start. And that connection and that obligation and that beautiful love and that we've not only built up with each other, but with country. The old people say all around this country, you look after country, country will look after you. I don't know how many times I've heard that, and we just don't know that. But I guarantee, once again, I'll make that reference. If this community got together down here, like they have and supported me for the last 3 or 4 years, I've run over 200 workshops, 40, 50 people each time, keep coming back. I've now got people that are going back onto their own property and building up their own fire knowledge, and I get messages, oh, Jason, thank you for what you... It's the answer. The answer's sitting right up on the hill there. But we've just got into this system now that we drive past it, and we prioritise everything else but that sick country up on the hill. We think it's all right that every time we drive along a road and we see that dead animal on the side of the road being hit by a car, that's normal, that's just the way Australia is. Well, it's not. Okay, it's not the way that things were. It doesn't have to be like that. Those animals won't be coming out to the road if that bush that they're coming from has got the tucker inside there and they've got that space to move and that habitat to call home and be comfortable just like we have. If that's all happening and then the focus is on the bush, everything will take care of itself. And I think the one message that I'm trying to make people realise is the power of fire as a healing agent for us as humans. I'm running a men's circle at home tonight, We sit around the campfire, us men, 10 or 11 of us, and we talk about stuff that we're dealing with that's bothering us. We all heal around the fire, whether we're sitting around the campfire or whether we're as a mob of 30 or 40 people out on country looking after the country, okay? Fire is the answer, I promise you.
I don't know if I'm allowed to speak. Yeah. Our words is for a smoking ceremony is Marak Muk Muk Marak and Wernbul Naraj, and it means think no evil, see no evil, speak no evil, hear no evil, admit truth, and live in spirit. I think we talk about smoking ceremonies like we're getting rid of heebie-jeebies, the ghosts and stuff. It just means get rid of all the bullshit you bring with you. Anyway, so fire and smoke are the answer.
Just before we go with the other question, I've got one on scale. So that the scale problem with our forests in Australia now is massive. I know that back up in the New England tableland in New South Wales, eucalypt didn't appear there till 20 years after white man arrived. Now it's all eucalypt. So how do we go about reversing that at scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. What's that saying about how do you eat an elephant? I think we need to start. We used to subsidise in Victoria the native forest logging industry to the tune of $200 million a year. I reckon we could redirect that bit of cash, probably, to trying to do some of the stuff you're talking about. Now, no, that doesn't address the scale question because $200 million a year is peanuts, but we can start to demonstrate some of the things we can do on country, and I think that's the trick, really. We have to make a commitment to try and do things and then work out systems to do it with scale and finance it. I think I really hate talking about economic systems because I don't really do numbers. I think we've already established that. But finance is not an issue in the world. There is lots of it. We need to be able to demonstrate we can do a thing and people need to value it.
If you want to paraphrase it so I can save me the
But the question was, how do we address these issues in forests at scale?
Oh, wow. Very, very slowly, I'd say. Look, I wish I had the answer for that. But everywhere I look around, as much as, we talk about unhealthy country and a bit of doom and gloom, I think you only have to look around the world, and especially over the last 3 or 4 years when we see the world events that are happening, the fires, the floods. She's very, very resilient, our mother. And eventually, whether we lift our fingers out of our backsides or not, she will take care of things. Okay, but for me, we've got to start opening up the bush. We've got to start thinning out the bush. How we do it, I don't know. Who does it, I don't really care. But until we start stopping our governments for putting an ownership on every bit of country, and us as silly humans thinking that someone else owns that out there, no one owns it. It belongs to all of us. We've all got an obligation to it. And I'm really hoping that the day where we say, well, stuff you government, stuff you councils, we're going out there today. I don't know how many families down here are struggling to pay for firewood each winter, but yet we've got hundreds and hundreds of tonnes of dead wood and stag sitting in that bush waiting for the next bushfire to come through and burn it all down. Why do we honestly think and keep letting governments dictate what we do on that on country? That doesn't belong to them. This belongs to all of us, and we've got to somehow, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we've got to start taking it back. I think, maybe one Sunday every month for the next couple of months, we all just rock up on a bit of council or government-owned land and we just go in there and start doing what the bloody hell we want. We start chopping down some trees, we start taking that firewood out. We start lighting some fires next April and May because we've just got to stop being dictated to. I wish, and I wish there was a quick and easy answer to that, but yeah, hopefully we find it really soon.
There's been a lot of talk about cultural burning over the past few years and everything, and it seems to have been compartmentalised in the discourse. And I'm just wondering if there's anything that you might want to say about the relationship between fire and water in caring for country.
Robin asked, and I know she has great insight into this, so thank you, Robin. Robin asked about the relationship between fire and water. It's strong, right? Reading country is about understanding everything, right? So it's about, and I honestly believe if you want to start dropping matches, you've got to get the other stuff first. And that's about how water moves through country. And that's about observation. I mean, you really need to know your bit of country before you start even thinking about. That's a permaculture design principle, isn't it? No, you better watch the few seasons or something. I've read a book. But I'm serious about it. You know, you can walk out on country and through observing the way perennial grass in particular, the amount of, as you know, Rob and Uncle Max would never allowed us to call it dead grass, but he would talk about dry grass within a tussock to understand how much accumulated dry material there was, and then you start to look at how much moisture that grass is holding. And from that, you can work out, well, it's ready. It's actually probably not that palatable right now for the animals on country. So it could use with a freshen up, and we use fire as a tool to do that. And then it draws more moisture out of the ground. And if you want to do it again, then you need more rain to come down and restore that juice. And you know, you're talking about overstocked country, overstocked trees. You know, eucalypts are extraordinarily good at fighting for water, right? And so they dry soils out. And one of the things that we have to acknowledge in this country is we've lost most of our topsoil. What we've got left, we're very bloody lucky because we have no right to it really, but we need to slow down the movement of water and hold it within country better. And that's about looking after mother skin, right? That's about holding water on country for longer. It helps make country resilient to drought, and our plants are incredibly good at retaining moisture in country, extraordinarily deep root systems in perennial grasses. I think I'll have to talk about that tomorrow, and I don't know much more than that, so it'll be a pretty quick session. But I think that's the relationship, Robin, and understanding the response of different plants to fire, but to different fire. You know, the old people knew that if you had a fire and a stand of quite dense peas or wattles, that was in response to the fire being quite hot there. And those plants were nursery plants. And they were there for a reason. Now all our fires are that bloody hot. But we can't allow the entire bit of country to be a wall of a wattle, because what happens to the next one, then it's a catastrophe. But it's about reading patterns in plants, water, and then maybe we'll give you a match.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there, Jack. Like I say, I think I get quite humbled and a little bit frustrated sometimes. Personally, I get put up on this pedestal of oh, you know, he knows this and he knows this. I probably know 10-15% of what the old people that walked this land 200 plus years ago actually knew. But when it comes to that question, the one thing I know is there is a deep connection between fire and water, as Jack's alluded to, but I will not burn any section of country, whether it's the size of this tent or the size of this table, unless I know that there is rain coming within 48 hours. And I think that's a basic principle. You know, when you plant something, you want a bit of sun and you want some rain. I don't know how, I'm talking hundreds of burns that I've done where there's been no rain forecast, or the forecast has changed from having rain, and all of a sudden a 5 by 10 metre patch has just started raining on that burn area. It is just like, oh, wow, like, it's creepy. And, you know I get a bit spiritual and a little bit weird, but honestly, when you start to feel that and you start to understand the power around country, around fire, around water, around what this must have been like, wow, you'll never have another wine again, I'll tell you. Honestly, it'll go straight through you. So, and I'm just hoping for the next 20 years that I'll live long enough to keep experiencing that, because for the first time since I was 13, I can say I don't drink, I don't smoke, and I don't take drugs. And that's all because of what Country and Fire's done. Did you have a question up the back? and finish us off.
I thanks, bro. The question was around about whether or not there's some stuff of our knowledge that can be adapted into systems of agency burns. I've worked with the CFA for a long time. I've been a CFA member for a long time. And you said you weren't going to have a go at them, but I will. No. In all seriousness, of course there are principles, but the way we do fire management in this country is military now, not the way he and I do it. Well, look, don't get me wrong. I'm still involved in some of those burns because I want to influence it, and I think we can, and we have a responsibility to influence it. And as a scientist, I'm constantly looking at ways where we can go. How's a way of co-opting some principles and putting it in? And we're doing it in ways on a small scale, admittedly, which I didn't really imagine that we would be. So using aerial drip torches with helicopters in country that's extraordinarily flammable, but using slope, differential moisture in different habitat types to make these fires extraordinarily patchy. Does it work? Yeah, pretty well. Like it's not as nice as an experience as Brother and I get pretty regularly, but we can do patchier burns. I mean, that speaks to scale too, to agree, on a different level, because actually what we want to build into systems is diversity in all that we do. And so, yes, we can. But those scorched earth burn everything, they actually have really diminishing returns because they actually drive a vegetation response which is not great. In fact, it advantages very dense eucalypts and mid-stories, which are wildfire habitat. And so we want to do different things and get different plant responses. So,